My name is Tamara, and at 34 I just buried my husband. I came back from his funeral exhausted and broken only to find my keys wouldn't work in my own front door. When my sister-in-law opened it, I saw my mother-in-law directing movers inside. My son built this house. My mother-in-law Brenda announced, her eyes cold. Everything here is ours now. You can leave. I stood there in my black funeral dress and I couldn't help but laugh. Because they had no idea that my husband Andre was actually... Before I tell you what they didn't know, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to support you. The black town car pulled away from the curb, leaving me in the suffocating silence of our upscale Atlanta suburb. The air was thick and humid, sticking my funeral dress to my skin. I'd just spent 3 hours watching them lower my husband Andre into the ground. My feet felt like lead as I walked up the stone pathway to the custom-built modern home Andre and I had shared for 5 years. It was supposed to be my sanctuary. It was supposed to be our sanctuary. I fumbled in my purse, my fingers shaking, finally pulling out the keys. I pushed the key into the deadbolt. It didn't turn. A wave of confusion cut through the fog of grief. Did I grab the wrong set? No, this was the only set I ever used. I tried again, jiggling it. The lock was solid. It wouldn't budge. They had changed the locks. Panic, cold and sharp, started to rise in my chest. I pressed the video doorbell, my own face staring back at me from the smart screen, exhausted, 34 years old, and now apparently homeless. After a long minute, the door clicked and swung open. My sister-in-law Keisha stood there. She was 31, Andre's younger sister, and she was already out of her funeral clothes, wearing casual leggings and a sweatshirt. Her eyes, unlike mine, weren't red from crying. They were cold, laced with something that looked disturbingly like pity. Keisha. What's going on? My key won't work, she just sighed as if I were the inconvenience. You should probably come in, Tamara. Mom and Dad are in the living room. She stepped aside and the scene that greeted me stopped my breath. My living room, our living room, was unrecognizable. Our minimalist furniture, the charcoal gray sofa, the glass coffee table, it was all pushed against the far wall. In the center of the room were stacked boxes, plastic storage bins, and 2 large floral-patterned armchairs I recognized from my in-laws' house. What is this? I whispered, stepping inside. My father-in-law, Joseph, 64, and built like a retired linebacker, was directing 2 movers carrying a large television. No, no, he barked, not even looking at me. Put that where the other one was. The big one goes in the master bedroom. My mother-in-law, Brenda, 62 and always impeccably dressed, stood by the fireplace. She was holding one of my crystal vases, inspecting it for dust. Mom, I said, my voice barely audible. Brenda, what is happening? Brenda set the vase down and turned to me. Her face, usually composed, was set in a mask of grim satisfaction. Oh, Tamara, you're back. Why are your things here? Why did you change the locks? We had to secure the property, of course, Brenda said, as if explaining something obvious to a child. We couldn't have just anyone coming in and taking things. Just anyone, I repeated, the insult stinging. This is my home. Brenda let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound I'd heard 1,000 times at family dinners, usually directed at a politician she disliked or a neighbor who'd committed some social faux pas. Honey, she said, stepping closer. Let's be very clear, because you seem confused, and I'm sure the grief isn't helping. She actually reached out and patted my arm, a gesture of pure condescension. Andre built this life, she declared, sweeping her hand across the room. My son, my brilliant, successful son, paid for this house. He paid for that car you drive. He paid for the clothes on your back. He worked himself into an early grave to give you all this. I stared at her, speechless. The audacity of it, the cruelty, just hours after his funeral. Now, she continued, her voice dropping, my son is gone. His assets, his house, his belongings, they belonged to his blood, his family, me, Joseph, and Keisha. She walked to the front door and opened it wide, the humid afternoon air washing in. "This house is ours now. You can leave." The words echoed in the suddenly silent room. The movers had stopped sensing the drama. Joseph stood with his arms crossed. Keisha watched from the kitchen doorway. I looked at Brenda, this woman who had just buried her son, now busy dispossessing his widow. I should have been hysterical. I should have been screaming, crying, begging. But instead, a strange, bubbling sensation rose in my chest. It was so absurd, so colossally misinformed, that I couldn't stop it. A small laugh escaped my lips. It started as a choked sob, but quickly turned into a genuine, if slightly unhinged laugh. Brenda's face contorted in fury. "What is so funny? Are you hysterical? Did the grief finally break your mind?" I wiped a tear from my eye, one of laughter, not sorrow. I looked at the floral armchair, at the boxes, at the triumphant look on their faces. "Andre built this," I finally managed to say, my voice shaking with suppressed laughter. "Mom, you really think Andre paid for all this?" I shook my head, the absurdity hitting me all over again. "Oh, honey," I said, mimicking her earlier tone. You have no idea what your son really was." Brenda's face, already pale with shock, turned a blotchy red. "What did you say to me?" she hissed, taking a step toward me. "How dare you? You stand there in the house my son bought and disrespect his memory." Keisha rushed to her mother's side. "She's lost it, Mom. The grief is making her crazy. Look at her, she's still laughing." Brenda's eyes narrowed into slits. "You're nothing without him, do you hear me? You were a broke assistant when he met you. He gave you this life. He gave you everything. You were just his shadow." His shadow. That phrase. It echoed in my mind, pulling me back to just a few months ago. To Thanksgiving. The last one we'd ever have. The memory was vivid. The smell of roasted turkey and Brenda's too sweet pecan pie filled the air. The entire family was gathered around the polished mahogany table in this dining room. My Andre was at the head of the table, looking flushed and handsome in his cashmere sweater. Brenda raised her wine glass for a toast. "I just want to say," she'd announced, beaming at him, "how proud Joseph and I are of our son." She reached over and patted Andre's cheek, her eyes sweeping over the table, making sure every aunt and uncle was listening. "He's built an incredible business. Just signed a massive contract to supply luxury vehicles to the new tech campus downtown. He really knows how to move in those circles. He always did." Those circles. We all knew what she meant. Andre, with his lighter skin and easy smile, navigated the white-dominated world of Atlanta high finance in a way I, with my darker skin and quiet intensity, never could. My in-laws, they loved that about him. He was their acceptable face of success. "And Tamara," Brenda had added, turning to me, her smile tightening. "We're so proud of you too, honey. Still doing your little computer consulting from home. It's just wonderful that you have a hobby to keep you busy while Andre provides for you." The table had murmured in agreement. I remembered feeling Andre's foot tap mine anxiously under the table. I looked at him, and he gave me that quick, desperate, "please not now" glance. So I did what I always did. I smiled. I nodded. "It's very fulfilling, Brenda. Thank you." I didn't say that my little consulting was T Solutions LLC. I didn't say that T Solutions had just secured a multi-million-dollar cybersecurity contract with the same tech campus Andre was supposedly supplying cars to. And I certainly didn't say that Andre's massive contract was a lie, that his luxury car business was bleeding money, that I had just 3 days before Thanksgiving quietly transferred $200,000 from my business account to his just to cover his payroll and stop his suppliers from suing him. I had kept the secret for him, to protect his pride from her. And this was my reward. "She's right, Tamara." Keisha's sharp voice snapped me back to the present. I was still standing in the foyer, the movers frozen, watching us. Keisha's husband, Brian, the white-bread investment broker, finally stepped forward. He'd been lurking by the stairs, looking annoyed by the whole scene. He clearly didn't have time for this now that the successful brother-in-law was gone. "Look," he said, adjusting his cuffs. "Let's just cut through the drama. Brenda, Keisha, you're right. She was his dependent." He turned his dismissive gaze on me. His eyes raked over my simple black funeral dress, judging its modest cost. "Keisha and I checked the preliminary financials this morning. Andre's business accounts are a mess, but his personal accounts are empty. You two obviously lived beyond your means." I said nothing. I was too tired, too done. "She probably thinks she's going to get some big life insurance payout," Keisha scoffed. "She's probably already spent it in her head." Brian sighed, stepping toward me like I was a stubborn child. "Tamra, you need to be realistic. You're a 34-year-old widow with no assets and no job to speak of." He looked at me, his face a mask of false pity, and delivered the line that would change everything. "You have no income." "You have no income." Brian said it with such finality, such smug white-bread confidence, as if he had personally reviewed my life's ledger and found it empty. I almost corrected him. I almost said, "My little computer consulting pays me a base salary of $600,000 a year, not including stock options, Brian, but thank you for your concern." But I held my tongue. The agreement Andre and I had was that we'd never discuss my finances with his family. It was our secret, our protection. He knew how they were. He knew they would bleed me dry if they ever found out I was the successful one, not him. His pride and my safety depended on that secret. Keisha must have mistaken my silence for defeat. She stepped forward, looping her arm through her husband's, a perfect picture of interracial bliss, built on mutual condescension. "Brian's right, Tamara," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "It's just over. And honestly, we're trying to make this easy for you. Mom and we went to the bank this morning." I looked at her. "The bank, Keisha, the funeral was 3 hours ago." "We had to act fast," she said, shrugging, "to protect Andre's assets." "From me. From creditors," she said evasively. "Anyway, as Andre's closest living relatives, I'm his wife," I said, my voice dangerously low. "Yes, but you're not blood," Brenda cut in, stepping forward again. "And as his mother and Keisha as his sister, we've taken charge of his estate. All of his accounts, the business accounts, the personal ones, even that little joint account he kept with you for groceries. It's all frozen. It's ours." Keisha smiled a tight, thin smile. "What she's saying is, you don't have a dime. You're broke, and you're in her house." The cold, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. They hadn't just shown up. They had planned this. While I was picking out a casket, they were at the bank. While I was writing a eulogy, they were changing my locks. My gaze fell on Joseph, the father, who had been silent this whole time. He just stood there, arms crossed, nodding his approval. This was a family decision. I felt the adrenaline surge, a fight-or-flight response that momentarily eclipsed the grief. My hand went to my purse and I pulled out my cell phone. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Joseph boomed, finally speaking. His voice was deep and intimidating. He stepped in front of Brenda, protecting her. "You call them, what are you gonna say? That your husband's loving family came to support you? That we're trying to secure his legacy?" He took a step closer to me. "Andre's name is on everything that matters, girl. The business registration, the old mortgage papers. We'll show them everything. We'll show them you have nothing." Brenda jumped back, in her voice rising with theatrical panic. "We'll tell them you're hysterical, that the grief has made you crazy. You're making threats. Look at her, Joseph. She's unstable." I looked at their faces. Brenda's manufactured hysteria, Joseph's righteous anger, Keisha's spiteful smirk, Brian's clinical detachment. They were right. If I called 911, it would become a messy public domestic disturbance. It would be me, the hysterical widow, against this united grieving family. They would spin it. They would lie. And in this neighborhood, in this house, I knew who the police would believe. My hand was shaking. I stopped dialing 911. "See?" Brenda sneered. "She knows she has no leg to stand on." I looked down at my phone's contact list. I scrolled past Andre, cell, my heart aching. I scrolled past Mom, home. I stopped on a name. David Lee, Escon. My finger pressed the call button. "What are you doing now?" Keisha demanded. "Calling your broke friends." I held the phone to my ear, my gaze locked on Brenda's. "I'm not calling 911, I said, my voice perfectly calm. "I'm calling my lawyer." Brian and Keisha actually laughed. It was a short, ugly sound, completely out of place in the somber house. "A lawyer," Brian scoffed, pulling his phone out of his own pocket as if to compare. "Honey, do you know what lawyers cost per hour, David Lee? You're calling David Lee. He's the top corporate attorney in Atlanta. His retainer is more than your husband's entire failed business was worth." Keisha chimed in, her voice like poison syrup. "Oh, Tamara, that's just sad. Are you going to pay him with your little online consulting hobby? Maybe you can design him a new website in exchange for his services." I ignored them both. My gaze was fixed on the far wall on the abstract painting Andre and I had bought on our honeymoon in Savannah. The phone clicked. A calm, professional voice answered. "David Lee." "David, it's Tamara." I said, my voice steady. There was a pause, and then his voice warmed, all business gone. "Tamara. My God, I heard. I am so sorry for your loss. I was going to call you tomorrow. Are you all right? Do you need anything?" Tears pricked my eyes at his genuine kindness. It was a stark contrast to the vipers standing in front of me. I'll be okay, David. But something has happened." Brian and Keisha were still snickering, whispering to each other. Brenda had her arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. "What is it?" David asked, his tone shifting back to professional. "They're here, David. The whole family. They've changed the locks. They're moving their furniture in as we speak. Brenda just told me to leave." The line was silent for a beat, then a deep, angry sigh. "So it's happening. Just like Andre was afraid of. He always said his mother would see his death as a business opportunity." "He was right," I whispered. My hand tightened on the phone. "They've already been to the bank. They told me they've frozen all the accounts, even my joint grocery account. They said I have no income and no assets. They said Andre's name is on everything and that I have nothing." "They are catastrophically wrong," David said, his voice hard. "And they've just committed several very serious crimes, including unlawful eviction and conspiracy to commit fraud. I'm on my way. I can be there in 20 minutes. "Okay," I said. "Thank you. I'm in the foyer. They won't let me past the living room." "Don't move. Don't argue with them. Don't sign anything. Don't say anything else. I'll handle it." "Wait," I said, and for the first time I raised my voice. I made sure everyone in the room could hear me clearly. I looked directly at Brenda, at Joseph, at Brian, and Keisha. "David, when you come, bring the files." "Which files?" "All of them. The T Solutions Incorporation papers, the wire transfer receipts, the loan agreements, and David," I took a breath, "bring the contracts." "The contracts." Brian repeated, his mocking smile faltering for the first time. He and Joseph exchanged a quick, confused glance. "You got it, Tamara," David said, and I could almost hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. "I'll see you in 20. I hung up the phone. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. The smug certainty was gone, replaced by a tense, crackling silence. The movers had stopped working and were standing awkwardly by the front door. "What contracts?" Joseph finally asked, his voice losing its boom. He sounded less like a patriarch and more like a confused old man. Brenda's eyes darted from me to her husband. "She's bluffing," she said, but her voice was a decibel too high. "She's trying to scare us. What contracts could a broke, unemployed widow possibly have?" "I guess we'll find out in 20 minutes, I said. I walked past them. No one stopped me this time. I went to the large picture window at the front of the living room, ignoring the floral armchairs and stacked boxes, and looked out at the manicured lawn. I was still in my black dress. I was still a widow. I was still heartbroken. But I wasn't broke, and I wasn't his shadow. I was the founder and CEO of T Solutions LLC, a multi-million-dollar cybersecurity firm. I was the one who had bought this house in cash before I even married Andre. I was the one who had quietly, secretly funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars into my husband's failing business to protect his pride from them. And Andre, my sweet, complicated, proud husband, he knew this day might come. He knew his family. The contracts, I said, turning back to them, are the loan agreements. The ones Andre signed putting up his entire business, everything you think you just inherited as collateral. Collateral against the money he borrowed. I let the words hang in the air. The money he borrowed from me. Brenda's face went white. You're lying. Am I? I smiled, a cold, sharp smile that felt foreign on my face. Let's wait for David. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. I stood by the window watching the manicured lawn Andre had been so proud of. I didn't turn around even as I heard Brenda muttering furiously to Joseph. She's bluffing. She's got nothing. What contracts? The girl's a liar. Keisha and Brian were whispering in the corner, Brian's face red with agitation. This is a waste of time, I heard him say. We should just have the police remove her. Just wait, Keisha hissed. Let's see what her lawyer says. It's probably some public defender. The movers, sensing a payday and a show, had decided to wait for instructions, and were sitting on the edge of their truck eating sandwiches and watching my front door. A black Mercedes sedan pulled into the driveway, slick and silent. A man in a perfectly tailored, dark gray suit got out. This was David Lee. He was 40 sharp and carried an expensive leather briefcase. He walked past the movers, nodded once at me through the window, and rang the doorbell. I opened it. David, thank you for coming. Tamara, he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. He stepped inside, his presence immediately shifting the power in the room. He nodded politely to my stunned in-laws. Mrs. Preston, Mr. Preston, Keisha, Brian. They stared at him. This was not the public defender they were expecting. Who the hell are you? Joseph demanded. I am David Lee, he said, placing his briefcase on the glass coffee table. I am Tamara's corporate counsel, and I am also the executor of her personal estate. Corporate counsel? Brian stammered, his investment broker brain finally catching up. Just in time, Brenda said, recovering. Another car just pulled up. A less impressive Ford sedan parked behind the Mercedes. A man in a rumpled suit, Mr. Henderson, hurried out, clutching a worn-out briefcase. He bustled in, looking flustered. Brenda, Joseph, sorry I'm late, he said, nodding at them before sizing up David. Mr. Henderson, I presume? David said, extending a hand. David Lee. Henderson shook his hand, looking slightly intimidated. Right. Well, let's get this sorted. My clients, he gestured to Brenda and Joseph, are the rightful heirs to this property. Andre Preston was their son. Andre was my husband, I stated from the window. Yes, yes, dear, Henderson said, patting the air. We all know grief is difficult, but the law is clear. Andre was the primary breadwinner and his name is on the house. Is it? David asked politely, taking a seat on our sofa. It certainly is, Henderson said, puffing up. He clicked open his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. I have here the mortgage application for this property filed 5 years ago, clearly stating Andre Preston as the primary applicant and borrower. The house is his. He slid the paper across the table. Brenda, Joseph, and Keisha all looked incredibly smug. This was their checkmate. David Lee picked up the document. He studied it for a long, silent moment. I watched his eyes scan the page. He didn't look worried. Mr. Henderson, David said, this is a mortgage application. That's right, Henderson said. An application, David continued. That was filed on October 14th, 2020. And he pulled a single crisp paper from his own briefcase. It was denied on October 16, 2020. Your client's son unfortunately did not have the credit or the liquid assets to secure the loan for this property. Henderson's face went blank. What? That's not possible. It is, David said. Brenda Joseph, your son's application was rejected. Andre didn't buy this house. He couldn't afford it. You're lying, Brenda shrieked. He told us he bought it. He did not, David said, his voice cutting through her panic. The house was never mortgaged. There is no loan, because this house, he reached back into his briefcase, was purchased in cash. He pulled out a thick, beautifully bound document and placed it on the table with a soft, definitive thud. This, Mr. Henderson, is the title deed, the official registered unencumbered title to this property, purchased in cash 4 days after your client's son's loan was denied. He slid it across the table. Brenda, her hands shaking, snatched it up. She read the page, her eyes widening in disbelief. This is a mistake, she whispered. This name, T Solutions LLC? That's not Andre. No, it isn't, David said. Keisha leaned over her mother's shoulder, reading the paper. Her face went pale. What is T Solutions? Who is T Solutions LLC? David Lee finally smiled. He leaned back on the sofa and gestured politely toward me, still standing by the window. That, he said, would be her. All eyes snapped to me. I was still standing by the window, the afternoon sun creating a halo effect that I knew must be infuriating them. Brenda's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. It was Brian, the finance expert, who spoke first. His voice was tight, condescending, but I could hear a flicker of new uncertainty. T Solutions, LLC. What is that? Some shell company you registered online for your little consulting hobby, a way to hide your grocery money. Keisha, clinging to her husband's lead, chimed in with a nervous laugh. Yeah, Tamara. What is T Solutions, your Etsy store? Did you finally sell one of those? Those things you knit? Their own lawyer, Mr. Henderson, looked utterly lost. He shuffled his papers, clearly never having heard of it. This wasn't in the documents Andre provided me. That's because Andre had nothing to do with it, David Lee said, his voice cutting cleanly through their ridicule. He stood up and walked slowly toward the center of the room, commanding the space. He looked at Brenda, then Keisha, then let his gaze rest on Brian. T Solutions, LLC, David said, his voice resonating with authority, is one of the fastest-growing private AI cybersecurity firms in the Southeast. They hold 3 major defense contracts, and their primary clients include the Atlanta Federal Reserve and 2 Fortune 500 companies you've definitely heard of. Brian's face went from red to a sickly pale white. As an investment broker, he knew David wasn't bluffing. That's not possible, Brian stammered, looking at me, at my simple black dress, at the woman he'd just called broke. She, David smiled, a cold, precise expression. Yes, Tamara Preston, who you all believed was just a hobbyist, founded T Solutions LLC 7 years ago. She is its sole proprietor, its president, and its CEO. He let that sink in. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of Brenda's sharp, sudden intake of breath. This house, David continued, gesturing around the room, was purchased in cash by T Solutions as an executive property for its CEO. It has been and remains a corporate asset. It is in no uncertain terms her house. He turned to Mr. Henderson, who looked like he was about to be sick. Andre's name was added to the title 2 years ago as resident in trust, a common courtesy for a spouse. He held no equity. He had no ownership. His name on the title was a formality, not a statement of financial contribution. Joseph, who had been silent, finally found his voice. You let us believe. You let him believe. I let Andre tell you whatever he needed to tell you to maintain his pride. I said, my voice quiet but clear. I let him feel like the man of the house. I let him pretend he was the provider. That was our arrangement. That was our marriage. Keisha looked like she had been slapped. So, all this time, When you were at home working, I was running a company with 42 employees. I finished for her. I was flying to DC for client meetings. I was managing multi-million-dollar budgets. While Andre was running his dealership. The mention of the dealership seemed to jolt Brenda back to life. The shock on her face was replaced by a new desperate line of defense. She had lost the house, that was clear, but she wouldn't lose the entire narrative. I don't care, she suddenly shrieked, her voice cracking. I don't care about this stupid house. So you bought it, fine. He let you buy it. She stumbled forward, her finger pointing at me, shaking with rage. But my son had his own business. That car dealership, it's worth millions. He told me millions. He supported you. He paid for your clothes, your food, your life. He was the successful one. He provided for you. Brenda's voice was high and thin, cracking on the word millions. She looked around the room, not for confirmation, but demanding agreement. Tell her, Joseph. Tell her about the dealership. Andre was a provider. He was a successful businessman. David Lee didn't even flinch. He just watched her, his expression one of almost clinical patience. He waited until her rant subsided into heavy, ragged breaths. Mrs. Preston, David said, his voice calm and quiet, which only made it seem louder in the tense room. Are you referring to Preston Premium Auto? Of course I am, she spat, his pride and joy. He built that from nothing, just like his grandfather. Well, David said, reaching slowly into his briefcase again. About that business. He pulled out another file, this one considerably thicker than the first. I'm afraid you've been misinformed about its financial health. Misinformed? Brian, the investment broker, suddenly looked interested. He hadn't liked being proven wrong about the house, and now his professional curiosity was piqued. What do you mean? David opened the file. I mean, Mrs. Preston, that Preston Premium Auto has been insolvent for over a year. Andre was... He checked his notes, leveraged to an unsustainable degree. The luxury inventory on his lot was all on consignment, and he was failing to make payments to the owners. He looked up and made eye contact with Joseph. 6 months ago, Preston Premium Auto officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The word bankruptcy hit the room like a physical blow. No, Joseph said, shaking his head. No, that's a lie. That's impossible. It's a matter of public record, Mr. Preston, David said. The filing was on May 12th. The liabilities listed were just over $1.2 million. The assets were negligible. But Keisha's voice was a confused whisper. He just told us last week. He said he signed that big tech campus contract, the one for the fleet of executive cars. He said it was a game changer. She looked at her parents for confirmation. Right, Mom. He told us that. He was so excited. He was, Brenda said, grasping at the straw. He was excited. He wouldn't lie about that. You're the liar. Since she shrieked, pointing at David, you're trying to protect her. You're trying to steal my son's legacy. Mrs. Preston, David said, and for the first time his voice held a note of pity. There was no tech campus contract. I know this because my client, T-Solutions, is the primary cybersecurity vendor for that campus. They haven't even finalized their fleet procurement plan. Andre was telling you what you wanted to hear. The movers by the door, who had been enjoying the show, suddenly looked very uncomfortable, as if they'd just walked into a funeral. So he had nothing, Joseph said, his voice hollow. He sank onto one of the floral armchairs, a man defeated. My son was a failure. He was in significant financial trouble, David corrected gently. Which brings us to the core of the issue. The bankruptcy filing was about to proceed to a Chapter 7 liquidation. His creditors were circling. Everything was going to be seized. And then, something happened. Brian, who had been silently doing math in his head, looked up. What happened? You don't just walk away from a Chapter 7. You don't, David agreed. Unless someone intervenes. 3 weeks after the initial filing, an anonymous angel investor stepped in. This investor contacted all of Andre's primary creditors and bought the debt. Bought the debt. Brian's professional skepticism was back. All of it. You said it was over $1 million. Not all of it, David said. Just the most pressing business loans and equipment leases, the ones that would have triggered the liquidation, the total amount this investor paid to save the business. He consulted the file again. Was $850,000. $850,000, Keisha whispered, her eyes wide. Who would do that for Andre? Brenda's head snapped up. A new desperate hope dawned on her face. It was one of his rich friends. From the golf club. See, he was respected. He was successful. His friends saved him. David Lee shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving Brenda's. It wasn't a friend from the golf club, Mrs. Preston. The investor who bought Andre's $850,000 debt, the one who took control of his failing business to save him from total ruin. He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting every person in that room lean in. That investor was T Solutions, LLC. The silence in the room was so thick, I could feel it pressing against my eardrums. Brenda's mouth was open, her face frozen in a mask of disbelief. Joseph had shrunk into the floral armchair, looking 10 years older than he had an hour ago. Keisha was staring at me, really looking at me perhaps for the first time in our lives, as if I had suddenly grown a second head. Brian, the finance guy, was the first to speak. His voice was a strained whisper. You were his angel investor? You paid his debt? It wasn't a gift, Brian, David Lee said quietly, as if speaking to a child. It was a structured business loan. Andre was about to lose everything. His reputation, his business, the image he'd built. It would have been all over the Atlanta business news. Tamara stepped in to prevent that. To protect him, I said, my voice quiet but echoing in the tense room. I did it to protect him, to protect his name, and yours. Brenda shook her head, a slow, jerky motion. No, he would have told me. He wouldn't take money from you. He was too proud. He was the man. He provided. He was desperate, Mrs. Preston, David said. He reached back into his briefcase one last time. He pulled out a single thick document bound in blue. And he was a lawyer. He understood contracts, which is why he signed this one. He placed the document on the coffee table with a soft, final thud. This is the loan agreement between T Solutions LLC as the lender and Andre Preston as the borrower. It details the transfer of $850,000, specifies the collateral. Brian, his professional instincts overriding his shock, snatched the document from the table. His hands visibly trembled as he flipped through the pages. The other family members watched him, their last hope resting on this man who had just minutes before dismissed me as having no income. He read, his eyes scanning the legal text. I could see his face paling, his brow furrowing. My God, he whispered mostly to himself. The interest rate, 10%. Payments were due monthly. Collateral listed as all assets present and future of Preston Premium Auto. He looked up from the page, his eyes wide with a new kind of horror. He hasn't made a payment. Not in 3 months. David Lee confirmed, his voice calm. The loan is officially in default, which means T Solutions LLC now has a legal claim on all remaining assets of his business, whatever little is left anyway. So it's gone, Joseph murmured, staring at the floor. Everything. The business. It's all gone. That's not the worst part, Mr. Preston, David said. Brenda's head snapped up. What could be worse? David Lee steepled his fingers, looking at Brenda, Joseph, and Keisha. He completely ignored Brian. This debt, this $850,000 debt, plus accrued interest, doesn't just disappear because Andre did. It is a legal obligation of his estate. He let the words hang in the air. Keisha looked confused, but Brian understood immediately. I could see the blood drain from his face. Wait. No, Brian stammered, looking at his wife. When you went to the bank, what exactly did you file? We just told them Andre was gone, Keisha said, her voice small. We said we were his next of kin, that we were taking charge of his estate. You filed to be the executors, David stated. You legally identified yourselves as the heirs to Andre's assets. Yes, Brenda cried, a new hope rising. So we are in charge. The insurance money, the dealership, it's all ours. David Lee looked at her with an expression bordering on pity. Mrs. Preston, he said slowly, when you claim an estate, you don't just inherit the assets, you inherit the liabilities, you inherit the debts. The room went absolutely still. What? Joseph said, his voice a gravelly whisper. What are you saying? David stood up, placing his files back into his briefcase. He looked at the family that had tried to throw a grieving widow out of her own home. I'm saying, Mr. Preston, that in your haste to claim your son's assets, you, your wife, and your daughter have just officially and legally inherited your son's $850,000 debt. He clicked the latches on his briefcase shut. A debt, he added, that is owed in full to his wife. Brenda's eyes darted around the room, her mind visibly spinning, searching for another angle, another way out. The $850,000 debt hung in the air, a crushing weight. Her gaze, wild and desperate, suddenly focused. The insurance. She whispered the words, gaining volume as the idea took hold. The insurance, Joseph, his life insurance. Andre had a policy, I know he did. He told me. She whirled on me, her grief and greed twisting into a mask of righteous fury. His life insurance. It was $2 million. We'll use that. We'll pay your stupid little company with that, and there will be plenty left over for us. She was triumphant again, having found in her mind the final solution. The one that would pay the debt and still leave them wealthy. Brian, the finance broker, looked relieved. $2 million, okay. Okay, that's workable. We can settle the debt with T Solutions and probate the rest. It's complicated, but it's not a total loss. Keisha nodded vigorously. See, Mom, it's fine. Andre still provided. He still took care of us, even in death. David Lee, who had been patiently watching this performance, cleared his throat. Mrs. Preston, he said, I have a copy of that life insurance policy here. He pulled one more sheet of paper from his briefcase. It is indeed for $2 million. Ha! Brenda shouted, pointing a shaking finger at him. So, we get the money. Not exactly, David said. He slid the paper onto the coffee table. As per Section 5B, the sole 100% beneficiary of the entire $2 million policy is Tamara Preston. The air left the room. Keisha's jaw dropped. Joseph just stared, his face ashen. What? Brenda whispered. No, that's not. He would have made me the beneficiary, his mother or his father or Keisha. He named his wife, David said simply, as most married men do. The policy is entirely Tamara's. Fine, Brenda shrieked, changing tactics instantly. Fine, she's his wife? So she has to pay his debts. She can use her $2 million to pay her $800,000 debt to her own company. It's all just moving money around. We're still... She was floundering, trying to find a way to keep control. It's not quite that simple, Mrs. Preston, David said, and he looked at me. It was the look he'd given me in his office 2 days ago. The look that said, this is your secret. I can't be the one to tell it. I took a deep breath. This was the last one, the final, awful truth. The one I had held back to protect everyone, to protect his memory, to protect them from this exact moment. The insurance policy. It's worthless, I said. Brenda stared at me. What are you talking about? David just said it's $2 million. It is, I said. But it has a standard exclusions clause, a morals clause. It doesn't pay out in cases of death resulting from certain activities, self-inflicted harm, gross negligence, driving under the influence. Brian's head snapped up. What are you implying? I looked at Brenda, at the woman who had called me a shadow, who had tried to evict me from my own home just hours after I'd buried her son. I lied to you, Mom. I said the word mom, tasting like ash in my mouth. I lied to all of you. At the funeral, at the hospital. I did it to protect you, to protect his memory. Lied about what? Joseph asked, his voice a low growl. Andre didn't die of a sudden brain aneurysm. The confusion on their faces was absolute. What do you mean? Keisha asked. We saw him. At the hospital. The doctor said what I told them to say, I clarified. What I begged them to put on the preliminary report to spare the family any more pain. He didn't collapse at his desk. That's just the story I told his office to tell you. I stood up the grief and anger and exhaustion of the last 2 weeks, culminating in this one terrible moment of clarity. Andre died on the side of the highway an hour outside the city. He wrapped that new sports car, the one he told you was a sign of his success, the one I begged him not to buy, around an oak tree. I paused, letting the image sink in. He was coming home from a business meeting that was actually a private poker game. And Mom, he was drunk. The police report shows his blood alcohol level was more than twice the legal limit. Brenda just shook her head, a silent, rhythmic, no, no, no. The insurance company knows he died in a crash, I continued. But as the beneficiary, I'm the one who has to submit the final claim, including the official police report and toxicology results. The moment I do that, the morals clause is triggered. The policy is voided. There is no $2 million. The final terrible checkmate. They had inherited an $850,000 debt, and the only asset that could have paid it was worthless. And its worthlessness was tied to a truth only I could provide. As the family stood there shattered and processing the total absolute ruin, financial and emotional, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite ring. It was a loud, sharp, authoritative knock. Knock, knock, knock. Keisha jumped. Who is that? David Lee, who had been silent, checked his watch. That would be my colleagues. The knock came again, harder this time. Actually, David said, looking up as a uniformed police officer walked past the picture window. I believe that's the police. The police, Joseph stammered. Yes, David said, walking toward the door. I had them paged when I arrived. After all, we have a report of an illegal entry theft and an unlawful eviction to discuss. David Lee opened the front door, revealing 2 uniformed Atlanta police officers. The senior officer, a tall, no-nonsense man named Riley, looked past David to me, then at the chaotic scene of mismatched furniture in the foyer. We received a call about a possible illegal eviction and trespassing, Officer Riley asked. That's right, officer, David said calmly. This is Tamara Preston. This is her home. These individuals, he gestured to my in-laws, have changed the locks, moved their own belongings in, and are refusing to leave. Brenda immediately lunged forward, her face a mask of practiced grief. Officer, thank God you're here. This is a terrible misunderstanding. This is my son's house. He just passed. This is my house. And she pointed at me. His wife, she's not well. The grief, she's confused. She's brought this man here to throw us out. Officer Riley looked at me with a flicker of pity, then back to David. Sir, we don't handle probate matters. This is a civil issue, a family dispute. It's not a family dispute, officer, David interrupted smoothly. It's a simple matter of property rights. Mr. Henderson, he nodded at the other lawyer, has already seen the title deed. This property is not owned by the deceased Andre Preston. It is and always has been owned by T Solutions, LLC. He handed the officer a certified copy of the deed and my driver's license. Officer Riley reviewed the documents, his expression clearing. He handed them to his partner, who nodded. "And this is you?" he asked, looking at me. "I am Tamara Preston, the sole owner and CEO of T Solutions," I said, my voice clear. "Well, ma'am, the ownership is clear," Officer Riley said, turning back to Brenda. "This is her property. She has asked you to leave. If you do not vacate the premises, you will be trespassing." Brenda's hands started to shake. But, he was my son. This is my family's home. We have... "Ma'am, what you have is a civil complaint if you choose to file one later. What you have right now is about 5 minutes to remove your belongings and yourselves from this property, or I will be forced to arrest you." "Arrest!" Keisha shrieked, finally finding her voice. "You can't arrest us. We're the victims here." As she screamed, a new horror appeared. Mrs. Davenport, our neighbor from 2 houses down the head of the neighborhood association, the one Brenda was always trying to impress, was walking her perfectly groomed golden retriever. She stopped at the end of our driveway, her face a polite mask of curiosity, clearly watching the 2 police cars, the movers, and the pile of furniture on the lawn. Brenda saw her. Her face went from red to a ghostly white. The public humiliation was more than she could bear. "Joseph," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "Do something, everyone is watching." Joseph looked at the police, at David Lee, at me, and finally at the floral armchairs. He looked defeated. "Brenda," he said, his voice heavy. We have to go." He turned to the movers who were standing by their truck. Put it all back on the truck. We're leaving." The next 10 minutes were a symphony of humiliation. The 2 movers, under the watchful eyes of the police, began the slow, agonizing process of moving Brenda's belongings out of my house and back onto the truck. The floral armchairs, the boxes of knickknacks, the television Joseph had been so proud of. My in-laws stood huddled on the lawn, defeated. Keisha was crying quiet, angry tears. Brenda was staring at Mrs. Davenport, who was now politely pretending to check her phone. Brian, Keisha's husband, hadn't said a word. He stood apart from them, near his own sleek sedan, his face like thunder. "Brian!" Keisha suddenly wailed, walking over to him. "Brian, don't just stand there! Help Dad with that box. This is so humiliating." Brian looked at her. He looked at her as if he'd never seen her before. "Help him," he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the silence. "Help him. You lied to me, Keisha." "What, Brian? No, I didn't. I thought—" "You told me your family was wealthy," he suddenly roared, and Keisha flinched back. "You told me your brother was this big-shot entrepreneur. You told me this was their house. You told me we were marrying into an empire." He gestured at the rumpled, defeated figures of her parents. "This isn't an empire. This is a circus. Your brother was a bankrupt alcoholic, and your parents are common thieves trying to squat in their daughter-in-law's house. You lied to me." "Brian, please lower your voice," she begged, grabbing his arm, looking nervously toward Mrs. Davenport. "We can talk about this at home." "Home," he scoffed, shaking her off. "I'm not going home with you. I am not attaching my name to this mess." What are you saying?" "I'm saying we're done," he said, pulling his car keys from his pocket. "I'm calling my lawyer. You can tell your mother she can add divorce to her list of problems today." He got into his car, started the engine, and peeled out of the driveway, leaving Keisha standing alone on the lawn, her mouth open in a silent scream, surrounded by her mother's ugly furniture. David Lee and the police officers stayed until the moving truck was loaded and had pulled away. Officer Riley gave me his card. "If they return or bother you in any way, ma'am, you call us directly." I nodded, unable to speak, and closed the front door. The click of the deadbolt echoed in the massive empty foyer. It was over. They were gone. I stood there in the silence, my hand still on the doorknob. The adrenaline that had been coursing through me, the sharp-edged clarity that had allowed me to face them, all of it, drained away at once, leaving me hollow. I looked around my living room. It was a mess. The floral armchair was gone, but it had left deep indentations in my expensive rug. Scuff marks from their boxes littered the hardwood floors. A half-eaten sandwich from one of the movers sat abandoned on my glass coffee table. I walked into the kitchen, my feet crunching on tracked-in dirt. I saw the crystal vase Brenda had been holding. She had left it, probably forgetting it in her haste. I picked it up. It was heavy, a wedding gift from my parents. I stared at it, and then my body was racked with a sob so violent it almost buckled my knees. I didn't cry for the house. I didn't cry for the humiliation. I cried for Andre. But it wasn't the pure grief I had felt at his funeral. This was something new, something jagged and poisoned. I cried for the man who had lied to me, the man I had protected, the man who had in the end still betrayed me. I slid down the kitchen wall until I was sitting on the cold tile floor, clutching the vase, and I finally let myself feel the full weight of it all. Our secret. My secret. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The T-Solution secret was never meant to be a weapon. It was meant to be a shield. I remembered the night I found out. It was 8 months ago. I had come home from a successful but grueling trip to D.C., having just secured the Federal Reserve contract. I was buzzing, excited to tell Andre. I found him in his home office, which was dark except for the glow of his computer monitor. He was just sitting there, staring at the screen, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Andre," I said, flipping on the light. "Honey, what's wrong?" He looked up, and his face, it was the face of a man who had completely given up. "It's over, Tam," he whispered. "Everything. It's all gone." It took him an hour to tell me everything. The gambling, the drinking, the bad investments. The dealership wasn't just struggling, it was a ghost. He was $800,000 in debt, with creditors calling daily, and a bankruptcy filing imminent. He had been hiding it for almost a year, juggling payments, taking out secret loans, all while pretending to be the successful golden son his parents adored. I should have been furious. I should have left him. That's what anyone would have advised. But I loved him. I loved the man he was when he wasn't crushed by the weight of his family's expectations. You've been pretending," I'd whispered the Thanksgiving toasts, and Brenda's bragging flashing in my mind. "You've been letting me, believe you were." "I know." He'd sobbed, his head in his hands. I couldn't stand the thought of them knowing, of you knowing. Your family already thinks I'm not good enough, and my family, my mom, it would kill her to know I failed." And in that moment, I made the decision that would lead me to this empty, silent house. "We can fix this," I said, "but you have to do exactly what I say." The plan was simple. My company, T-Solutions, would act as an anonymous investor. We would buy his debt, restructure his business, and give him a loan to stay afloat. I would take over all our finances personally and professionally under the guise of portfolio management. But there were conditions. He had to sign the loan agreements, making his business the collateral. He had to give me full power of attorney over his finances. And he had to get help. He had to start therapy for his gambling addiction and attend AA meetings for the drinking he swore was just stress relief. He agreed to everything. He cried, he thanked me, he said I was saving his life. I did it because I loved him. And I did it to protect his pride from them. I knew how Brenda and Joseph treated weakness. I couldn't bear to watch them tear him apart the way they had always tried to tear me apart. So I became the silent partner, the invisible provider. I funded his illusion. I thought I was saving him, but sitting there on my kitchen floor hours after his funeral, I realized the truth. He never stopped lying. He signed the contracts, but he never stopped drinking. The drunk driving accident wasn't just a tragic end. It was the final fatal proof of his deception. And the final cruelest irony. The very secret I kept to protect him from his family was the same weapon they tried to use to destroy me. They stood in my house, the house I paid for, and called me the dependent. They called me the one with no income. My silence and act of love had been twisted into my greatest vulnerability. I spent the next 2 days in a fog. The house was too quiet. Every room held a memory of Andre, but now those memories were tainted. Was that a real smile in our wedding photo, or one he practiced? When he bought me that expensive bracelet for our anniversary, was he using my own money? I moved through the rooms packing his things. The clothes he'd left behind his toiletries still in the bathroom, his favorite coffee mug. I packed them all into boxes, a second funeral, this one for the man I thought I knew. But while I was grieving, Brenda was plotting. She had been publicly spectacularly humiliated. She had lost the house her son-in-law had abandoned her daughter, and the neighbors, the wealthy white neighbors she so desperately wanted to impress, had seen her furniture being hauled away like common trash. She had lost the battle of assets, so she decided to start a war for the narrative. And she knew exactly where to fight it. Sunday morning, just 4 days after Andre's funeral, Brenda Joseph and a weeping Keisha walked into the First Ebenezer Baptist Church. This wasn't just any church. This was the church. It was the social, political, and spiritual center of Black Atlanta. It was where you went to be seen, to network, and to establish your family's place in the community. My in-laws had been members for 30 years. They arrived early, dressed in somber, expensive black. Brenda, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, clutched a handkerchief. They sat in their usual pew, third row, center aisle, a perfect portrait of a family shattered by grief. After the service, during the coffee hour in the fellowship hall, Brenda held court. She didn't have to raise her voice. She just let the community come to her. Sister Hattie, the head of the usher board, was the first. "Brenda, honey, how are you holding on?" "That's all it took." Brenda collapsed into a chair, dabbing her eyes with the handkerchief. "Oh, Hattie," she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know how much more I can take." "What is it, baby? What's wrong?" "It's Tamara," Brenda said, her voice a low, conspiratorial sob. "My boy is gone, and now she's taking everything." The women gathered closer. "What do you mean, taking?" "I always worried about her, you know," Brenda said, shaking her head. "She's different, so ambitious, so driven, not like our Andre. He was always so trusting, so generous. His heart was too big for this world." She was painting the picture, and I knew exactly what colors she was using. Andre, her golden child, light-skinned, charming, and generous. And me, the different one, the dark-skinned, ambitious, controlling wife who had never quite fit in. We went to the house," Brenda continued, the tears flowing freely now, "just to be close to him, to gather his things. And she threw us out." "She what?" Sister Hattie gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "She threw us out of the house my son built for her. She had a lawyer there. She said it was all hers. She said Andre had nothing. That he was a failure." This was her masterpiece of manipulation. She mixed the truth that I said Andre had no money with the most painful lie that I had thrown them out. "And now," Brenda whispered, "she's freezing the accounts. We can't even afford." She didn't have to finish. The narrative was set. Tamara, the cold, dictatorial wife, had manipulated their trusting, successful son for years, controlling all the money. And the minute he was gone, she had revealed her true colors, dispossessing his grieving, heartbroken family. The story spread through that fellowship hall faster than wildfire. I found out on Monday. I hadn't gone to church, I couldn't. I was still packing Andre's life into boxes. I decided to go to the Daily Grind, a Black-owned coffee shop Andre and I used to frequent, just to feel normal for a minute. Michelle, the owner who had catered our last Christmas party, saw me walk in. Her usually warm smile froze. "Tamara," she said, her voice flat. She busied herself wiping down an already clean counter. "Hi, Michelle. Can I just get a large black coffee?" "Sure." She didn't make eye contact. She took my money, handed me the coffee, and immediately turned to the next customer. I stood there confused. A few other regulars, people I knew by name, glanced at me and then quickly looked away, whispering to each other. I left the coffee bitter in my mouth. It happened again at the dry cleaner, and at the small market where Andre and I bought our groceries. The whispers, the cold shoulders, the community that had been my support system was icing me out. The final blow came that evening. My best friend Simone called. "Hey T," she said, her voice strange. "Listen, I can't make coffee tomorrow. Something came up." "Simone, what's wrong? You sound weird." There was a long pause. "Tamara," she finally said, "I heard what happened. I heard what you did to Brenda and Joseph. At the house. How could you? What, Simone, what did you hear?" "I heard you threw them out, that you changed the locks while they were at the funeral, that you told them Andre's legacy was worthless, and that you were keeping every penny." My stomach dropped. "Simone, that is not what happened. They changed the locks. They were trying to throw me out." "Tamara, that's not the story Brenda is telling. And frankly, she's his mother. People are, well, people are believing her. I think I need some space. This is all too much drama for me right now." The line clicked. She had hung up. I stood in my silent, empty home holding a dead phone. Brenda had won. She had taken my husband, she had tried to take my home, and now she had successfully taken my entire community. I was completely, utterly alone. The silence in my home was deafening, broken only by the vibration of my phone on the granite countertop. Simone hadn't been the last call. The community was mobilizing. I watched the screen light up, names I hadn't seen in months flashing, and then disappearing, leaving only voicemails I would never listen to. Andre's aunt from Macon, a cousin from Decatur, Sister Hattie from the usher board. My house was a fortress now. My sanctuary had become a prison. For 2 days I didn't answer the phone. I didn't check social media. I just existed. I walked through the rooms, Andre's boxes stacked in the hallway like a monument to my failure. Not my failure as a wife, but my failure to see that my act of protection, my silence, was the biggest mistake I could have made. On the 3rd day, a number appeared that I couldn't ignore. Reverend Michael Williams. He was the leader of First Ebenezer. A man with a voice like rolling thunder and the moral authority of a saint. He was old school Atlanta, a pillar of the Black community, and he was Brenda and Joseph's spiritual advisor. They were probably in his office right now, sipping coffee, performing their grief. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, Reverend." "Tamara, my child." His voice was exactly as I remembered, warm, deep, and carrying an immediate weight of expectation. "My heart is just broken over this situation." He called it a situation, as if it were a spilled drink at coffee hour. "I just had a long, painful meeting with Sister Brenda and Brother Joseph," he continued. "They are devastated, Tamara. Utterly devastated. First by the loss of their son, and now by this conflict." I gripped the edge of the counter. "Reverend, with all due respect, you don't understand what happened." "I understand," he said, his voice hardening just slightly, "that a mother is grieving. I understand that she went to her son's home for comfort and she was, in her words, cast out by you and your lawyer. That is not what happened. She changed my locks. He cut me off, his pastoral tone firmly in place. "Child, the word tells us to honor our elders. Sister Brenda is suffering a pain you cannot imagine. She lost her firstborn son. And in her time of grief, you have chosen to cause a division. You have chosen money over family." The accusation was so direct, so wrong, it stole my breath. That's not true. "Tamara," he said, "I have known the Preston family for 30 years. They are good, God-fearing people. They welcomed you into their family. And now you are holding your husband's assets." my assets, hostage. He said the community is deeply concerned, that you are bringing shame on Andre's name by acting this way. He said the duty of a God-fearing wife is to be a comfort to her husband's family, not a source of more pain. He was lecturing me. He was taking their side completely and utterly. And that's when it hit me. My silence. My silence which I had kept out of love for Andre. Brenda was using it as a weapon. She had told the entire church, the entire community, that I was the monster. That I was the cold, ambitious wife who had locked her grieving mother-in-law out of her son's home. I had been so worried about protecting Andre's reputation as a businessman that I had allowed Brenda to destroy mine as a woman. Reverend, I said, my voice shaking, she lied to you. Tamara, do not speak ill of your mother-in-law in her time of mourning, he chided. Sister Brenda is willing to forgive your hardness of heart. She told me so herself. She doesn't want to fight. She just wants what is fair. She is asking you through me to sit down and divide the assets. To let them have the house as is their right as his parents, and perhaps you can keep the insurance money. It seems a Christian and equitable solution. The audacity, the sheer blinding audacity. They wanted the house, my house, the one I paid for. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest, extinguishing the grief and replacing it with pure, uncut clarity. I was done. I was done protecting Andre. I was done protecting them. Reverend, I said, and my voice was different. The tremor was gone. It was ice cold. You have been a member of my husband's family for 30 years. You baptized him, you eulogized him, and you believe you know them. I do, child. No, you don't, I said. You know the performance they give you every Sunday. You've heard Sister Brenda's story. It's a very good story, very moving. I paused, took a breath, and made a choice. Now I have a question for you. Do you want to know the truth? There was a long silence on the line before Reverend Williams finally spoke. The truth, child? He asked, his voice suddenly uncertain. What truth is that? I looked at the closed front door, the boxes still stacked in my hallway, the faint scuff marks from their furniture on my floor. I was done. I was so completely, finally done. Reverend, I said, my voice ice. Thank you for your concern, but I won't be needing your counsel on this matter. You'll understand why soon enough. I hung up the phone before he could reply. My mind was racing. Brenda had used the community against me. She had used the church, the place we were supposed to find sanctuary, as her personal stage. She had painted me as the cold, ambitious, difficult black woman, a stereotype I had fought my entire life. Fine. If she wanted to fight a war of narratives, she had chosen the wrong opponent. I wasn't just an assistant. I was a CEO. I knew how to manage a narrative. I didn't call the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I didn't call the mainstream news. They wouldn't understand the nuances. They wouldn't understand the specific painful dynamic of colorism and classism within our own community that Brenda was exploiting. I needed someone who got it. I opened my laptop and went to the Atlanta Beacon, the most respected online journal for Black business and culture in the city. The byline I clicked on was Rochelle James. Her column, The Ledger, was famous for taking down performative leaders and exposing financial hypocrisy. I found her direct email. The subject line I typed was simple: the truth about Andre Preston's estate. She replied in 15 minutes. We met 2 hours later at her private office in Midtown. Rochelle James was a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her 50s, with eyes that seemed to see everything. Mrs. Preston, she said not unkindly, I get a dozen family drama tips a day. I already heard the rumors from First Ebenezer, a grieving mother, a cold-hearted widow. Why is your story different? I didn't say a word. I just opened my briefcase the same way David Lee had opened his. I placed the first document on her desk. This is the title deed to my home, purchased in cash by my company T Solutions LLC. I placed the second document next to it. These are the incorporation papers for T Solutions, founded 7 years ago, sole proprietor, Tamara Preston. Me. Rochelle's eyebrows shot up. I thought you were an assistant, a consultant, I said. That was the story we maintained, the story my in-laws preferred. Why? She asked, her journalistic curiosity piqued. Why hide your success? Because I loved my husband, I said, the words catching in my throat. And my husband was drowning. He was drowning in his family's expectations. He was a wonderful man, Rochelle, but he was not a good businessman. His dealership was a failure. He was bankrupt. I pushed the next file across the desk. This is Andre's bankruptcy filing from 6 months ago. Rochelle read it, her eyes widening. He was 1.2 million in debt. And I saved him, I said. Or I tried to. This? I slid the final thick contract over. This is the loan agreement. $850,000. Transferred from T Solutions to Preston Premium Auto, secured against the business Andre no longer really owned. I didn't do it to control him. I did it to protect him from the shame. I did it so his mother could keep bragging about her successful son at Thanksgiving. Rochelle sat back stunned. He owed you nearly $1 million. And when he died, I said, his family, who had been living off the illusion I funded, locked me out of my own home. And the accounts, she asked, the ones they froze. They froze my personal grocery account, I said. They had no access to the T Solutions accounts. They were trying to starve me out while they figured out how to steal a house they never owned. Rochelle was silent for a long time. This is more than I expected. Tamara, are you willing to go on the record with this? With all of it? They gave me no choice, I said. Brenda went to my church and called me a monster. My best friend hung up on me. My community thinks I'm a gold-digging demon. I took my phone out and showed her the timestamps of Keisha's texts, the ones from the bank, the ones sent while I was at my husband's funeral repast. Rochelle's face hardened. She didn't just lie, Tamara. She weaponized your love for him against you. They all did. She closed her notebook. Thank you for trusting me with this. The community deserves the truth, not just Brenda's performance. The next morning, my phone woke me buzzing so hard on the nightstand it almost fell off. It wasn't one person. It was everyone. Texts, missed calls, emails. I opened my browser. Rochelle hadn't just published the story, she had published the documents. The title of the article was plastered across the front page of the Atlanta Beacon. CEO Tamara Preston called gold digger by in-laws revealed to have secretly financed husband's life and failing business for years. The article dropped at 5 a.m., and by 5:30 my phone was buzzing so hard it vibrated off the nightstand. But this time it wasn't the cold shoulders of the community. It was the sound of the entire community stampeding in the other direction. The first text was from Michelle, the coffee shop owner. Oh my God, Tamara. I just read Rochelle's article. I am sick. I am so sorry. Please come by. Coffee is on me for life. I feel like the world's biggest fool. Then came an email from Sister Hattie, the head of the usher board, the one who had listened so intently to Brenda's performance. Her email was long, rambling, and full of scriptures about false witness and hidden truths. She apologized profusely and said she was calling an emergency prayer meeting for the restoration of Tamara's good name. By 9 a.m., Brenda's world was on fire. The Atlanta Beacon article was the only thing anyone in our circle was talking about. Rochelle hadn't just told my story. She had published the proof. The title deed, the bankruptcy filing, the loan agreement with Andre's signature clearly visible. And most damning of all, the text messages Keisha had sent me while I was at the funeral repast talking about freezing my accounts. Brenda and Joseph were no longer the grieving parents. They were con artists. The backlash was immediate and brutal. My mother-in-law, a woman who lived for her social standing, was digitally excommunicated. She was removed from the First Ebenezer Charity Board by 10 a.m., the annual Juneteenth gala she was supposed to co-chair. Her name was quietly deleted from the website by noon. Joseph, who sat on the board of a local business council, was asked to take a leave of absence pending a review. But the most spectacular fallout wasn't from Brenda or Joseph. It was from Brian. He called me at 3 p.m. and he wasn't calm. He was panting as if he'd been running. "Tamara," he said, his voice high-pitched with panic. "Tamara, I just read the article. I had no idea." "No idea about what, Brian?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Any of it. The company T Solutions. I thought you were just... You... Keisha told me her brother supported you. She told me you were... fragile." "I see. And the company, T Solutions. I just looked you up. You're connected to the tech campus, to the venture capital groups. My biggest clients are in that circle, Tamara. They're your colleagues." "That's right, Brian," I said. "They're going to pull their portfolios," he whispered, his voice cracking. I'm ruined. My reputation. Keisha did this." "Keisha," I said. "And you. You stood right here in my house and told me I had no income. You laughed at me." "I was misled," he shouted. "I was deceived. That whole family, they're liars. I had no idea about the debt, the bankruptcy. I swear to God, Tamara, I am just as much a victim here as you are." It was a masterful performance. The rat was not just leaving the sinking ship, he was trying to set it on fire as he left. "What do you want, Brian?" I asked. To apologize, publicly. I'm going to release a statement. I'm going to make it clear that I stand with you, that I was horrified by what they tried to do, that I am ending my association with the Preston family. Permanently. What does that mean? It means," he said, his voice going cold, "that I'm divorcing Keisha. I've already moved out. I'm filing the papers this afternoon. I will not have my name, my business dragged down by her family's filth." He hung up. And sure enough, an hour later, a public post appeared on his professional LinkedIn page. He praised me as a pillar of the Atlanta business community. He spoke of his deep shock and horror at the deception perpetrated by members of the Preston family, including his soon-to-be ex-wife. He offered his most profound apologies to me for any pain he had inadvertently caused. He was cutting his losses. I almost felt sorry for Keisha. Almost. I spent the next week in a quiet whirlwind. The locks were changed again this time, with a high-end security system I controlled. A cleaning crew came and scrubbed the house from top to bottom, removing every trace of their presence. The floral armchairs were gone. David Lee was handling the legal side, but the community had already passed its sentence. Brenda and Joseph were pariahs. They had lost everything that mattered to them: their reputation, their standing in the church, and the respect of their community. Then on a rainy Tuesday night, 2 weeks after the funeral, there was a knock on my door. I looked at the security feed. It was Keisha. She was alone, soaked from the rain, her usually perfect hair plastered to her face. She was wearing the same leggings she'd worn the day she tried to throw me out. She looked small. I opened the door, leaving the security chain on. She didn't speak. She just stood there, shivering, her face crumpled and tear-streaked. "What do you want, Keisha?" She looked up, her eyes red and raw. "Tamara," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "Please, you have to help me. I have nowhere else to go." I stood there, looking through the narrow gap the security chain allowed. Keisha was a mess. Rain and mascara ran in dark tracks down her cheeks, and she was shivering, clutching her arms. This wasn't the smug, cold sister-in-law who had watched me broken and grieving just 2 weeks ago. This was a cornered animal. "Tamara, please," she sobbed, her voice raw. "You have to let me in. You don't understand. It was Mom. It was all Mom." I just waited, my hand resting on the door. She planned it all. Keisha choked out words tumbling over each other. The locks, the bank. She told me Andre would have wanted us to be secure. She said you were cold, that you wouldn't share, that you'd probably try to hide his money. And you believed her, I said. It wasn't a question. Yes, no, I don't know. She's my mother. She said you two had been fighting, that Andre was miserable. She said you were always working on your secret project and that you looked down on us. She said you thought you were better than us because you were some kind of tech genius. So Andre had told them something. Or at least enough for Brenda to twist. She said... Keisha's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, as if we were suddenly allies. She said you were probably the one who caused his aneurysm. All the stress you put on him, making him feel like a failure because your little company was taking off. I felt the blood drain from my face. That was the narrative she was spinning, that I had killed my husband with my ambition. And Brian... Keisha let out a fresh wail, this one sounding genuine. He left me, Tamara. He saw that article. He took all the money from our joint account. He said my family was filth. He said I was filth. The irony was so bitter I almost choked on it. She was describing almost exactly the financial betrayal she herself had tried to inflict on me. He said I'm a liar, that I married him under false pretenses, pretending my family had money when we were just... She couldn't finish. I'm going to be evicted tomorrow. I have nothing. He froze all my cards. I can't even buy diapers for my... Oh God, I don't have anything. She pressed her face against the door gap, her breath fogging the air. Please, she begged. You're rich. I see it now. You have this house, you have that company. What's a little money to you? Just enough to get an apartment. Enough to feed my son. Please, Tamara. For family. Family. That was the word that did it. That was the word that turned the last lingering embers of my pity into ice. Family, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You want to talk about family now? Standing on my porch in the rain now that your white-bread husband has finally realized what kind of vipers he married into? She flinched. Tamara, I'm sorry. Where was family 2 weeks ago, Keisha? I asked, my voice rising just a little. Where was family when I was standing right where you are, just back from burying my husband? Where was family when you were laughing with your mother, calling me broke, calling me a shadow? You stood right there, I said, pointing to a spot in my foyer, and you smirked. You smirked while your mother told me to get out of my own home. You smirked while your husband told me I had no income. You were enjoying it, Keisha. I saw you. You loved it. You loved seeing me, the different one, the one who never quite fit, finally put in my place. No, she sobbed. I was following Mom. I was scared. You weren't scared, I said. You were greedy. You saw a payday. You saw a house and $2 million, and you were willing to destroy my life and my husband's memory to get your hands on it. Please, she begged. I'll apologize. I'll tell everyone the truth. Just don't let me be homeless. I looked at her, her face streaked with tears, and rain, a perfect picture of desperation. She was right. I had the power to save her. I could write her a check. I could give her a room. I could show her the mercy she had refused to show me. I'm not Brenda, Keisha, I said coldly. I don't reward bad behavior, and I don't pay for apologies that are only offered by people who get caught. Tamara, no. You made your choice, I said. You stood with them. You chose Brenda's lies over my reality. You chose this house over your brother's widow. You don't get to come here for a bailout now that your plan has failed. her face crumpled in disbelief. You're really going to do this? You're going to turn me away? Forgiveness isn't free, Keisha. And I'm fresh out. I closed the door slowly, deliberately, cutting off her next sob. I didn't lock the chain. I turned the deadbolt, the solid thunk echoing through the foyer. I leaned my head against the wood, listening as she pounded on the door. Tamara, please don't do this. Don't be like her. Please. Her wails continued for another minute, then faded, replaced by the sound of her sobbing as she walked away in the rain. I stood there breathing. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt the cold, hard finality of justice. My house phone, the landline I kept in the kitchen, began to ring, startling me. I walked over and picked it up. Tamara Preston's residence. Tamara. It was David Lee. His voice was all business. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. No, David, it's fine. What's going on? It's time, he said. I've just been notified by Andre's probate lawyer. Brenda and Joseph have officially filed as executors of his estate, claiming all assets and all liabilities. They're still doing it? I asked, shocked. Even after the article? It was their last desperate move, David said. And it was their fatal mistake. Tamara, it's time. We're calling in the debt. The call with David set the final act in motion. There was no more waiting. There was no more hiding. There was only the cold, clear logic of the law. The next morning, a certified courier knocked on the door of my in-laws' house, the same one they had lived in for 40 years, the one filled with Andre's childhood photos and Brenda's prized antiques. Joseph signed for the envelope, his hands steady. They still believed they were in a negotiation. They still thought they held some cards. I imagined the scene as David had described it to me. Brenda, probably in her silk robe sipping coffee, would have opened the letter with annoyance. Demand for payment. Notice of default. The legal language would have been dense, but the numbers would have been perfectly clear. $850,000 plus accrued interest, penalties, and legal fees, bringing the total immediate demand to just over $910,000. Their first call, of course, was to Mr. Henderson, their lawyer. I could almost hear his flustered, wheezing voice over the phone. Well, yes, Brenda, technically. As I said, when you file as executor, you accept the entire estate, the assets and the liabilities. I assumed Andre's assets would far outweigh. What are you saying? Brenda would have shrieked. That we owe her this money. The debt is to her company T Solutions, Henderson would have clarified. And yes, legally the estate owes this debt. And since you are the executors controlling the estate, you are responsible for settling it. Then the panic would have truly set in. $900,000. They didn't have it. I knew their finances almost as well as I knew my own. Andre had confided in me about that too. His parents lived on Joseph's modest pension and their Social Security. They had no savings. Their entire net worth, their entire identity was tied up in their fully paid-off house, the house they lived in. They must have spent the next 48 hours in a desperate scramble, calling banks trying to get a home equity loan. But a recently retired couple with no significant income trying to borrow nearly $1 million, no bank would touch them. They would have called Keisha only to find her calls going straight to voicemail. She was busy fighting Brian, who had already frozen her accounts. They were trapped. The final letter arrived 3 days later. It was simple, professional, and absolutely brutal. Notice of intent to seize assets. Since the estate of Andre Preston was in default and unable to make payment on its outstanding debt to T Solutions LLC, my company was now formally placing a lien on the estate's largest tangible asset, which wasn't the car dealership. That was now just a shell company owned by T Solutions. The only asset left in Andre's name that had any real value was ironically his childhood home. He had been added to his parents' deed years ago, a common tactic to avoid probate. And now I owned his share. And I was calling in the debt against it. Brenda called me. I didn't recognize the number, so I picked up. You can't, she whispered. Her voice was unrecognizable. The fire was gone. There was only dry, rattling fear. "Tamara, please. This is our home. You can't take our home." "I'm not taking anything, Brenda," I said, my voice as calm as the ocean view from my window. "I am a creditor, collecting on a legal and valid debt. A debt your son willingly signed for, and a debt you willingly inherited when you tried to steal my house." But, where will we go? We're old. We have nothing else." "You should have thought of that," I said, "when you told me to leave, when you changed my locks, when you told your friends I was a gold-digging monster. You should have thought of that when you were sitting in my living room dividing up my belongings while I was still wearing my funeral clothes." "Please," she begged, and the sound was wet. She was truly crying now. It was a mistake. I was grieving. I wasn't thinking." "You were thinking very clearly, Brenda. You went to the bank, you hired movers, you changed my locks. Those are all very deliberate actions, and actions have consequences." But, we're family," she wailed, the last desperate card she had left to play. "You're right," I said, "and as family I wanted to let you know personally. David is filing the papers tomorrow. The property will be listed for public auction in 30 days to satisfy the debt. I'd recommend you start packing." I hung up the phone. I watched the sun reflecting on the water. I thought about Andre. I thought about the $850,000. I thought about the $2 million in insurance money I would not be claiming because I refused to start my new life by committing fraud even for a justifiable reason. No, this was cleaner. This was justice. I knew as I sat there that Brenda and Joseph were in their living room surrounded by their furniture in their house of 40 years, finally understanding what it felt like to lose everything. They weren't just in-laws. They weren't just grieving parents. They were debtors. And I was the creditor. The reckoning had arrived. The 30 days David had mentioned felt like an eternity. My phone became a battlefield of their desperation. First came Brenda's calls, dozens a day, hysterical weeping voicemails that alternated between begging me to be reasonable and accusing me of being a cold-hearted monster. Then Joseph's trying to sound authoritative, offering payment plans he knew they could never afford, demanding I, quote, "stop this vendetta." Finally, there were Keisha's texts. Pictures of her young son. "You're making a child homeless, Tamara. How can you sleep at night?" I didn't answer a single one. I forwarded the most threatening ones to David and let the rest go into the void. I was building a wall brick by brick around my grief and my resolve. The day of the auction was cold for Atlanta, a sharp, clear November morning. I didn't dress like a CEO. I wore dark gray trousers, a simple cream-colored silk blouse, and large black sunglasses. I parked my car 2 blocks away and walked my footsteps quiet on the pavement. I wanted to see, but I had no desire to be seen. Not yet. I saw them immediately. They were huddled on the sidewalk just past the property line of their own home. The auction company had forbidden them from standing on the lawn. They looked broken. Brenda, the woman who lived for her Sunday best, who would never be caught at the grocery store without her hair and makeup perfect, was wearing an old pilled coat and tennis shoes. Her face was swollen from crying. Joseph stood beside her, his shoulders slumped, his skin a dull gray color. He looked like a man hollowed out from the inside. Keisha was there too, holding her toddler son, her face a mask of raw, furious resentment. She wasn't looking at her parents. She was scanning the crowd, her eyes searching for me. A small, quiet crowd had gathered. A few curious neighbors, the ones Brenda had always tried to impress, whispering behind their hands. A few men in suits with clipboards, the investors, the vultures looking bored and professional. And the auctioneer, a man with a booming voice, setting up his podium on the front lawn. This was the ultimate humiliation for Brenda. They weren't just losing their home of 40 years, they were losing it publicly. The auctioneer cleared his throat, his voice unnaturally loud in the quiet street. "All right, folks, we are here today for the property at 456 Elm Street. A lovely 4-bedroom colonial in a desirable neighborhood. The bidding will start at $500,000 to satisfy the outstanding lien against the estate." I watched Brenda flinch hard at the word lien. Keisha leaned in, muttering to her mother. I could guess what she was saying. "It's okay, Mom. The house is worth $900,000. They'll just pay the debt and we'll still have something left." A man with a clipboard raised his hand. 500. Another investor countered. 525. 550, 600. The bidding was fast and personal. The investors knew the value. They were professionals. 650. 700. 750. I saw Keisha relax slightly. The number was climbing. It would cover the debt. They wouldn't be completely wiped out. Brian, her ex-husband, wasn't there to tell her that after auction fees, capital gains taxes, and lawyers' bills, they would be left with pennies. The bidding stalled at $890,000, just shy of what they owed me. 890,000, the auctioneer called. "Do I hear 9? Do I hear 900? He looked at the investors. They shook their heads. They had reached their limit. 890, going once. Brenda was holding her breath, her hand gripping Joseph's arm. Going twice? I stepped out from behind the large oak tree where I had been standing. I walked calmly to the edge of the lawn. I took off my sunglasses. I made sure Brenda, Joseph, and Keisha were all looking directly at me. Their faces, the recognition, the pure, unadulterated shock. $1 million, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the morning air like a knife. Absolute silence. The auctioneer's jaw dropped. The investors with the clipboards turned staring. The whispering neighbors gasped. I... The auctioneer stammered, looking at his sheet. "I have a bid, $1 million. From the lady in the cream blouse." He looked at the other bidders. 1 million. Going once. The investors just shook their heads, slowly pocketing their pens. They weren't bidding against me. They knew a power play when they saw one. Going twice. Keisha was just staring, her mouth open, her face white. Sold. The auctioneer yelled, his gavel cracking through the silence. To the lady in the cream blouse, for $1 million. The moment the gavel fell, Brenda's eyes rolled back in her head. She crumpled to the ground in a dead faint. Joseph just stood there, paralyzed, watching her fall. The auction staff rushed over to me with paperwork. My identity had already been verified by David. I signed the documents, my hand perfectly steady. The assistant handed me a small envelope. "The keys, ma'am. Congratulations." I tucked my sunglasses into my purse. I walked past the neighbors who parted for me like I was royalty. I walked past Brenda, who was now being fanned by a frantic Keisha. I walked directly across my lawn and stopped right in front of Joseph. He finally looked up, his eyes hollow, defeated. I held up the keys. They jingled, a small, sharp sound in the quiet morning. "Joseph," I said. "Keisha, I believe you have some things you need to remove from my property." Brenda was on the ground, a crumpled mess of designer-label grief, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Joseph was trying to pull her up by one arm, his face a mask of gray terror. "Brenda, get up. Get up. People are looking." Keisha, still holding her toddler, was just staring at me, her eyes wide and full of a hatred so pure it was almost primal. She looked from me to her mother, and back again, her world completely, irrevocably shattered. I walked across the lawn, the damp grass cool under my shoes. I stopped a few feet in front of them. The neighbors were still watching, pretending to check their mail, walking their dogs a second time. "Tamara." It was Brenda. She had scrambled to her knees, her hands clasped in front of her as if in prayer. Her perfectly manicured nails were caked with dirt from the lawn. "Tamara, please. You can't just take our home. This is everything. We have nowhere to go. Nowhere." Her voice broke on the last word, and a fresh wave of sobs shook her. I looked down at her, at this woman who had tried to destroy me. I felt nothing, just a vast, cold, quiet emptiness. Nowhere to go. I repeated, my voice quiet. It's a terrible feeling, isn't it, Brenda? To stand on the doorstep of what you thought was your home and be told you're not welcome. To have nowhere to go. I let the words settle. I could see the memory dawning in her eyes. That's what you said to me, I continued, my voice never rising. You stood in my house, a house I paid for. You stood there just hours after I buried your son and you told me you can leave. You told me I could leave. You were so sure, weren't you? You're a monster! Keisha suddenly spat, her voice shaking with rage. She adjusted her son on her hip. So this is what you wanted, revenge, to see us with nothing, to make us just as miserable as you are. You're just as cruel as my mother said. No, Keisha, I said, turning my gaze to her. That's the difference between you and me. You enjoyed it. You stood in my foyer and smirked while your husband told me I had no income. You thought I was weak. You thought I was broke. You were kicking someone who was already on the ground. I looked at Joseph. And you? You let this happen. You let her do it. You let Andre live a lie his entire life. You raised him to believe that image was more important than truth. That impressing you was more important than being honest with his own wife. You raised him to be so terrified of your disappointment that he had to lie and drink and gamble, and ultimately die, rather than admit to you that he had failed. Joseph flinched as if I had struck him. You're right, I said. You have nowhere to go. You have no money. You have no reputation. You have nothing. I watched them, the three of them, the broken patriarch, the dethroned matriarch, the divorced, disinherited daughter. But I'm not you, Brenda, I said softly. I reached into my coat pocket. I didn't pull out the keys to the house they were standing in front of. I pulled out a different set. A small, simple silver set of keys on a plain plastic ring. I tossed them onto the sidewalk in front of Brenda. They landed with a small, pathetic clink. Brenda stared at them as if they were a snake. What? What is this? I think you need a place to stay, I said. It's an apartment, 2 bedrooms, over on the south side, in the low-income senior complex. It's clean. Keisha's head snapped up. A low income. I've paid the first 6 months' rent, I continued, cutting her off, my voice flat. And I've had basic furniture delivered. A bed for you, Joseph. A bed for you, Brenda. And a small cot for Keisha and her son. It's not the Beacon Hill life you're used to, but it's a roof. Brenda was speechless, her eyes locked on those keys. Humiliation and a desperate animalistic relief were fighting for control of her face. Consider it, I said, my voice soft but clear. A parting gift. A thank you, really, for raising Andre. You taught him to value appearances above all else. And in the end, that's what made him sign every contract I put in front of him. That's what gave me all the legal leverage I needed to end this. I turned away from them, leaving them there on the sidewalk, with the keys to their new humble life. I walked back to the front door of the house I had just bought. My house now. I put the key in the lock and turned. The click was loud in the silence. I paused on the threshold and looked back at the sprawling colonial, the symbol of their 40 years of perceived success, now mine. As for this house, I said so quietly, only I could hear a new powerful idea forming. This house is going to have a brand new purpose. 6 months passed. The Atlanta winter thawed, and spring arrived with a vibrant, defiant burst of dogwoods and azaleas. The house at 456 Elm Street, the one that had been the epicenter of my in-laws' 40-year reign and subsequent downfall, was transformed. The lawn was pristine, the colonial blue paint was refreshed, and a tasteful professional sign was staked near the walkway. It read, Andre's House, a center for Black entrepreneurial leadership. Today was the grand opening. I stood on the front porch, the same porch I had been locked out of, looking at a crowd of over 100 people gathered on the lawn. There were city council members, local business leaders, and dozens of young, hopeful faces from the community. Rochelle James, the journalist from the Atlanta Beacon, was in the front row, notebook in hand, a warm smile on her face. David Lee stood beside her, looking immensely proud. I was no longer in a funeral dress. I was wearing a sharp emerald green power suit, my hair cut into a chic, confident style. I felt whole. I stepped up to the small podium. The crowd quieted. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady, amplified by the small speaker. "Welcome to Andre's house. 6 months ago, I lost my husband, Andre Preston. Many of you knew him, or rather you knew the idea of him, the golden son, the successful businessman. Andre was a good man. He was a loving husband, but he was also a man who was crushed by the weight of expectation. He was a man with a powerful dream, but without the right guidance or support. He believed that to be a successful black man, he could never show weakness, never ask for help, never admit he was failing. I looked out at the crowd, at the young, eager faces. He was wrong. Success isn't about never failing. It's about having a community that will catch you when you do. I paused and my eyes drifted just for a second across the street. After Andre's death, I was faced with a series of truths. I learned that my husband's business was in default. I learned that he owed my company T Solutions nearly $1 million. I learned that his family misunderstood the financial reality of our lives. That was the most diplomatic way I could phrase it. And I continued, about his $2 million life insurance policy, the one he left with me as the sole beneficiary. A murmur went through the crowd. This was the part they didn't know. The article had detailed the debt, but not the insurance. For 6 months, that policy has sat untouched. The community has been divided. Stories have been told. I have been called a victim, and I have been called a monster, a gold digger, a cold, ambitious wife who locked her grieving in-laws out of their home. Today, I want to end the speculation. I want to honor my husband's true legacy, not the illusion of success his family demanded, but the reality of the man I loved. Andre's greatest wish was to build something that lasted. I took a deep breath. That is why I am announcing today that 100% of Andre's $2 million insurance policy is being used as the seed fund for Andre's house. It will provide grants, mentorship, and financial counseling for the next generation of Atlanta's Black entrepreneurs so that no one with a dream has to be crushed by the fear of failure ever again. The crowd erupted in applause. It was loud, genuine, and overwhelming. Rochelle James was beaming, scribbling furiously in her notebook. David Lee was clapping so hard his hands were red, and as the applause swelled, my gaze was drawn as if by a magnet across the street. They were there, just as I knew they would be. Brenda, Joseph, and Keisha. They stood on the sidewalk, a pathetic, huddled trinity of failure. Brenda looked a decade older. Her hair, no longer perfectly highlighted, was mostly gray, pulled back in a severe bun. She was wearing a simple dress that looked dated. Joseph stood beside her, leaning heavily on a cane, his once imposing frame now slumped. Keisha was there, holding her son's hand, her face thin and sharp with a resentment that had clearly settled in for good. They were watching their old home, their old life, the symbol of their 40 years of social climbing, now transformed into a beacon of hope by me. It was my name on the plaque, my vision, my money. Brenda met my eyes across the distance. Her face was a mask of hatred, humiliation, and a terrible aching loss. I held her gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I felt no anger. I felt no pity. I felt nothing. She was just a woman across the street. A ghost from a life that was no longer mine. I held her stare for one long, silent beat. Then I turned away from her. I turned back to the crowd, back to my community, back to the future I was building. Andre's house is officially open, I said into the microphone, my voice ringing out clear and strong over the applause. Let's get to work. I picked up the oversized scissors and cut the red ribbon. The crowd cheered and I smiled a real genuine smile as I stepped across the threshold into the new beginning I had built from the ashes of betrayal. This story is a powerful lesson in self-preservation. Tamara's biggest mistake wasn't just loving a broken man. It was hiding her own strength to protect his fragile pride. Her silence meant, as an act of love was twisted into a weapon against her. Her in-laws called her the failure, while living off her success. The ultimate payoff wasn't just the house, it was reclaiming her narrative. Never ever dim your own light to make someone else feel bright. Your independence isn't a threat, it is your throne. What did you think of Brenda's downfall, and have you ever had to deal with a toxic mother-in-law? Share your story in the comments below.